I will start with overview of Georgian legislation, and then we'll speak about trends we are observing through media monitoring and debunking of fake news, because the hate speech and anti-Western context and the fake stories, manipulative content are sometimes interrelated. Georgia has quite liberal legislation in terms of protecting freedom of speech. Freedom of hate is protected as freedom of opinion, and this opinion might be hateful or offensive. Though this has its consequences, but in current legal environment and context, restriction legally the hate speech might be more problematic in terms of damaging overall pluralism in our landscape. And I will try to explain rationale behind this. The first problem in Georgian context is misunderstanding of notion of liberal state, a notion that majority rules that, and we should follow the decisions and opinions of majority while we are talking about individual rights is dominant even among some politicians from ruling party, and it's dangerous because when you have restriction of legislation, restrictive legislation, goal of the law should be to protect minority from dictatorship of majority rather than vice versa. Subjective interpretation of hate speech, and you discussed with first speaker, is another challenge, because if you ask politicians, especially from ruling party, they can pinpoint and indicate some critical stories from opposition affiliated media and say this is hate speech rather than hate directed against a certain group based on ethnicity, religious belonging, gender identity, or other definitions that is part of Council of Europe definition of hate speech. There are certain attempts to introduce blasphemy law, and usually it comes from Orthodox Church. We had several cases when Parliament discussed the legislative amendments, but because civil society is very active and united, and we have very strong institutions like Public Defender Office and coalition of NGOs called No to Phobia, because we are working closely with our international partners, it helps to stop this process, because blasphemy law is about the religious feelings and it might be very subjective. Another reason why legal restriction of hate speech might be problematic is the local legal culture, weak rule of law, and in transitional democracies, there is a risk to use this legislation against critical voices rather than against populist political parties or media outlets with clearly hateful editorial policy. And formal recognition of secularism is another challenge, because Orthodox Church is quite influential in Georgia, and in certain cases it's quite difficult for the government to enforce certain regulations. When we have the clerics who are inciting hate speech and state fails to enforce the rule of law, in 2014 there was a pogrom of LGBT pride, and priests were involved in this pogrom. So the question is why we are enforcing the legislation if state fails to enforce it against the most influential actors, and the clergy is among these influential actors in Georgia. So we have very liberal legislation on the one hand, and weak media self-regulation. And what civil society actors are trying to do is to make some media self-regulation stronger in order to avoid some misinterpretation of any legislation. Of course, we have criminal charges against hate speech if it causes any immediate threat of violent actions, but it's not related of daily expression of discrimination or other types of hate speech. Georgia has mixed self-regulation. It's mandatory for broadcast media to create complaint commissions, and it's voluntary for print and online media. There is a Charter of Journalistic Ethics, which is membership-based organization, which is good platform to review and criticize media. And the position of civil society actors is naming and shaming is the best way to address this issue when we have institutional problems in case of judiciary and political agenda and influence of Orthodox Church overall on educational system and on judiciary as well. However, media self-regulation is quite weak because usually the civil society actors or NGOs are using this mechanism. We have weak complaint culture. That's why we need awareness raising campaigns in order to inform public how to defend their rights. We do advocacy work and protect minorities in certain cases, but there are quite complicated definition of regulations in case of broadcast media, because only directly concerned party has right to appeal. And in certain cases, it's not unclear when you are speaking about discrimination of certain group based on their ethnicity or religion or gender identity. Some media outlets try to misinterpret existing legislation and not to accept complaints coming from civil society organizations saying that you are not directly concerned party. Now we're working on legislative amendments to clarify this provision of the law in order to make media self-regulation more effective and protect rights of minorities. Number of complaints in broadcasting media complaint commission is quite low, but majority of them are on hate speech cases. As regard to Media Development Foundation I represent, we do regular media monitoring of hate speech and fake content since 2014. Our approach is to identify problem of, first of all, to map major actors and narratives, deconstruct if it's fake news, track transparency of sources to identify and make more clear what is the intention of certain expression, because sometimes it's unintentional, it's less harmful, but when especially outside actors, and I mean information operation from outside countries, try to divide people based on their ethnic or religious belonging, it's dangerous for society and for whole country. And we do media literacy work, and this part explain concerns media literacy because social media totally changed notion of traditional media. Nowadays, anybody can be a journalist without a diploma or media experience, since social media allows to produce content and disseminate this content in social networks simultaneously. These data are from our 2018 media monitoring report, which shows that xenophobia and homophobia is almost equal, but it's changing. It depends on development, because when Georgian government adopted anti-discrimination law, it was perceived as a law protecting the gay rights, only gay rights, and allowing the same-sex marriage. In 2017, or I can't recall exact date, homophobia was more dominant. But since the largest part of this xenophobia goes to migrants, it's mostly anti-migrants attitude, and Turcophobia is a part of xenophobic context, and I will try to explain later why. The major messages are against migrants. It's about the sale of land to foreigners. It's about triggering historic trauma, saying if Russia is occupied, why not Turkey, referring to historic occupation from Ottoman Empire. Linking the terrorism with migrants or anti-Chinese and anti-Iranian statements. So major challenges in Georgian media landscape, and we're tracking not only media sources, but politicians, civil society actors, clergy. It's anti-migrant attitudes, triggering historic trauma, and homophobic discourse and gender stereotypes. They use mostly scare tactics when it concerns migrants, linking terrorism to migrants, linking criminal and sexual harassment to migrants. And you see on the screen article by Sputnik Georgia. They are using photo manipulation while selecting the photo of Muslim ladies. And the headline is manipulative itself. It's about Georgia ranks 117 in migrants index, but actually it's about public opinion, migrants acceptance index. One letter is change in headline that creates perception. It's about actual numbers of receiving Muslim migrants, while it's about public opinion, how people, what is the people's attitude towards the migrants. And the linked article says that European countries expelled more than 80 migrants to Georgia. Overall, this article creates context that EU obliged Georgia to receive Muslim migrants, while EU expels ethnic Georgians from their countries. So this is a good example how anti-Western context is created. Another example and methods they are using, reprinting satiric humoristic story as a real news. You see headlines about migrant raped a goat in Bulgaria, and primary source of this news is English language satiric website saying in its mission that all their heroes are invented and it's nothing to do with reality. But this story creates narratives that migrants are sexual offenders. And another examples published by Georgian media and Russian language media is a fake photo depicting the lady as a victim of migrants, sexual victim of migrants. And the story is about campaign organized by victims of sexual offenders that they are sorry to Mustafa. Actually, original photo is about Ukrainian women who campaigned in support of their soldiers and trying to collect some warm clothes to support Ukrainian soldiers fighting in Crimea. And another example of trying to divide people based on their religious belonging is a widely disseminated story about Georgian Muslims trying to gain independence from Georgia with arm and support of Turkey. Actually, photo depicts the events of 4 years ago happening events. Primary source of this news is Express Gazeta, owned by Komsomolskaya Pravda. Far-right groups multiplied these stories through social networks, which creates tension and tries to divide people based on their religious belonging through manipulation of visual and the content. Another example, because Georgia has large Armenian, Azeri minorities and ethnic Georgians, Muslim Georgians. So it's quite difficult, easy to provoke the tensions in society by spreading myths and disinformation. In September, one of the several online media outlets published a story that Armenian citizens of Georgia living in Javakheti organized rally against the NATO. Original photo depicts totally different event, saying that the Georgian Armenians organized rally demanding recognition of genocide, which is legitimate goal of Georgian Armenian ethnically Armenian Georgian citizens, while requests to be separated from the country is not legal and it creates tensions in society. As I already mentioned, that in addition to existing challenges, digital age creates another problem, since social media lacks professional editing tools, and anybody without journalistic experience can create content on their own and share misinformation, disinformation, and contribute to dissemination of rumors and harmful content. So our approach is to address this issue through media literacy programs, because it's more about preparing media consumers to digest information critically. I will give you one example how social media can be harmful, because often traditional media relies on Facebook posts, and this is just a single source. And this Facebook post might provoke hate comments, and then traditional media reprints this story trying to legitimize the faked or hateful content. Just one illustration of this: Georgian politician published a photo on its Facebook saying that Ukrainian fascists are destroying Orthodox churches. When we verified this story, we discovered that it was old photo depicting gas explosion in Zaporozhye church, and nobody destroyed the Orthodox church. But since religion is very sensitive topic, he tried to mobilize rally in front of Ukrainian embassy, and then Sputnik Georgia and other media outlets published this fact as a real story based only on single source. So another example, and I will finish with this example, is news widely disseminated in social network about Turks trading with body organs of Syrian children. When we verified these photos, we found that these pictures were depicting totally different events, some surgery in Korea or other events. So that's why media literacy is important to inform public. and to track transparency of sources, because this story about the Turks were spread by Fox News G, and you see the Western brands on the screen, The Guardian with some spelling mistake, or Euronews G. It's mostly the Western brands are often used to demonize Western society and spread different kind of fake content. We run several programs to support media literacy. This is a Myth Detector Lab. Our motto is discover truth yourself. And young people without journalistic background try to find truth themselves. We are equipping them with necessary skills to differentiate quality media product from manipulative one, because we need quality media in order to make informed choices. These are our media literacy resources. We developed some online game, which is about building stories. You can access them on our website, millab.g.